So we need to talk about Marco Rubio's comments on Ukraine. If you haven't seen them yet, we're going to break them down for you. But first, I need you to know I've tried reaching out to his office to do an interview to kind of talk about things like this. And regardless of where you stand with him, he is going to be shaping the future of Ukraine and other countries with the decisions he will be putting forward. We should be able to ask him some good questions on these things. So let's go ahead and break down what he said. In the interview, he denounces what Moscow has been doing to Ukraine, saying that yes, they were atrocities. But then he also said it was dishonest to claim that Kyiv was capable of destroying Russia on the battlefield and returning to pre-2014 states. If you don't know, prior to 2014, Ukraine had in their possession everything from Luhansk, Donetsk, and Crimea. Crimea was essentially given to Russia in order to kind of stop them from invading, and well, what'd they do later? They just continued invading, which is why we know that if we give Russia more land now, that won't work. That being said, during his interview, he acknowledged that Vladimir Putin was carrying out these atrocities and horrible, horrible things, which, I mean, is quite obvious. But he also had doubts about Kyiv's prospects for a complete military victory. And I want to read for you his quote where he says, "But what the dishonesty that has existed is that we somehow led people to believe that Ukraine would be able not just to defeat Russia, but destroy Putin, push him all the way back to the world what it looked like in 2012 or 2014 before the Russians took Crimea." He continued by saying that the US has been funding a stalemate in which is a war that Ukraine has now been set back 100 years, adding that both sides of this conflict will need to make compromises. And those are some heavy words. He said a lot in there that really is like, whew, okay. So I figured, let's take a step back. If I remove all emotion from everything that I've been doing for the past 3 years when it comes to Ukraine, I will say this. It's been a stalemate on the front lines. There really is no winner, no loser at this very moment. You could say that Ukraine is winning in a way because, well, Russia conquered so much, Ukraine took a decent amount of that back, and now Russia is losing so many men, so many resources just to reclaim just a little bit more land. On the other hand, you could say, well, Ukraine has lost a lot of men, but most importantly, they've lost cities that not only are gone, but Russia has leveled completely. We're talking about high-rise buildings, schools, businesses, churches, all leveled down to the ground. With my goggles back on, you can now look at what I look at through my point of view, which is, well, the United States under Biden only gave Ukraine enough equipment to survive. They were always late on handing things to them. They never gave them what they needed, and that caused this war to drag on longer and longer. If the United States and its allies actually gave everything to Ukraine, the things that they actually needed when they needed it, this war would have been over a while ago. That was maybe F-16s early on, heavier equipment, permission to strike Russia deeper. There essentially was always a 6 to 8 month kind of delay when Ukraine says, hey, we need tanks. Hey, we need permission to hit this. The Biden administration waited. It's because of that there is now a stalemate. Rubio mentions here that it would be dishonest to lead people to believe that Ukraine could go back to the 2014 border. And here's the thing, Zelensky understands that as well. During all of his peace talks, he's always said that Crimea would always be something that we could discuss further down the line. And he also understands that there is going to be a compromise. That's the only way this is going to work because, well, Putin's not going to stop because he's got no reason to stop. He doesn't want to stop. But this is where I think Rubio has it a little bit wrong here. He talks about compromise as though both sides need to do it. And Zelensky has been open about that. Putin in the Kremlin has not. Russia's been doing this for almost 3 years. We're a few weeks away from 3 years. And at this very moment, there is absolutely no change to what Putin wants from what he wanted 3 years ago. He wants Ukraine to have less of a military. He wants them to have no alliance. He doesn't want them to be a part of NATO ever, not even like a 20-year deal, ever. They not only want the land they have now, but the 20% extra that they have that they still didn't conquer yet that's currently in Ukraine's hands. And while, yeah, they say that Ukraine could have some weapons, they need to sign a contract that states that they wouldn't use it against Russia. Now, what does Ukraine get out of that? Is there anything they get out of that besides the war just ending? No. There's no guarantees, security guarantees, that Russia would never do this again. Remember, we tried this back in 2014. It didn't work. And you have to put yourselves in the shoes of Ukrainians who have lost brothers, sisters, moms, dads, uncles, which this is 100% true because I know people this happened to, whose soldiers were in the front lines and the Russians took their cameras and their phones and videotaped them doing horrible things to them and then sent them to their own mothers. What compromise could you do that would satisfy the dad who's hurting, the son who's hurting, the daughter, the whoever is hurting because Russia decided to do this heinous thing on a peaceful country? Let's remember, Russia, they stole Ukrainian children and tried to incorporate them into their own country. They had mercenaries come into places like Bucha and do such heinous things that are so disgusting. It's just like, how does another human do that to another human? They've leveled buildings and killed off generations of families. And still to this day, they're targeting civilians every single night, whether they be as a missile strike or a drone strike. They're terrorizing Ukrainians. So what compromise could you come up with that would satisfy that hurt that Ukrainians feel every single day? And I don't think Rubio understands that. What I think needs to happen is this. Marco Rubio, go to Ukraine. Meet with Zelensky. Meet with the military. See what is going on. See what Ukraine has currently been doing and asking for. And see what can actually be done for a just peace. Because a ceasefire without a just peace just means that Russia's going to pause and come back and do it all over again. We need something that will not only stop this from happening in Ukraine, but also stop it from happening in other countries. And to be honest with you, at this very moment, I don't know what that would be. I don't think anyone does at this very moment. All I know is Russia needs to be held accountable. They can't just get a slap on the wrist again and say, don't do that again, buddy, because we've tried that and it didn't work. And the one thing I really want you to understand in all of this is Ukraine, in this current situation, in the very limited amount of equipment that was given to them, has been doing 75 times more than what anyone could have ever imagined. If you remember, Russia was considered the second most powerful military nation in the entire world. So having Ukraine, with only maybe 10% of the stuff that they actually need to shut down Russia, is shy of a miracle, and they're doing it. This means it's not about who has the best technology, who has the bigger force, who has more money. It's about who has more heart in this fight. And that's Ukraine. And they're tearing down Russia and North Koreans with half of the amount of men and barely enough equipment. Ukraine is doing whatever it takes, no matter what it takes, in order to make sure their country is free and not under any kind of Russian rule. And it's that kind of heart that every single Ukrainian I know and I've interviewed has. They don't want this war, but they would rather give up their life to protect their friends and family than rather have to deal with anything that pertains to Russia. Which brings me to my last point, fear. Russia installs this fear on everything and everyone, and for the first time, a country stood up and said, nah, we're not taking this. Ukraine has learned that Putin's fear means nothing in this world, which should teach people like you and I that are not Ukrainian to go, all those threats Putin had, it's just a fear tactic, and he truly isn't going to do what he said he's going to do. We should not be scared of him. Because for Putin, fear is power. And if there is no fear, he has no power. I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on everything happening in Ukraine, so be sure to share my videos and follow me for more.